Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I can't believe it's this point in late summer already.
I know, yeah.
It's a great time.
We're in mid-August, and there's this kind of, we kind of look and we hear all these people talking about back to school. This kind of fills you with a little bit of dread, that summer is kind of ending, but there's still a lot to do out in the garden, isn't there?
Oh, there is. And I never get too blue when I think about or green or whatever, when we think about the end of the growing season coming. And of course, the first frost of fall kind of signals the end of the growing season officially. But I never get too down about that because I'm already thinking about next year. Because what we do for our plants this year gives energy for next year with things like perennials, trees, and shrubs. And so there's so much planning that we can do this time of year, looking ahead for next year already. And so it's kind of fun to enjoy what we have now, but also keep that eye on next year. That's why I'm excited to talk about today's topic, fall planting. Yeah. Because there's a lot of good planting we can do in preparation for next year and coming years.
Before we dig into that, just a quick question. I want to see, what is your favorite thing in the garden now? I mean, because I said, here we are. I made it sound kind of doom and gloom that, the season's over and there's nothing to do. But what are the things that you're really enjoying right now? Obviously, with the tomatoes coming in.
Yep.
Those are great.
And I'm enjoying the annual flowers because really in August, many of them are at their highlight. Yep. And so I'm enjoying the container plants, such as Bee's Knees Petunia. Mm-hmm. And there's a new All-America winner called Enviva Pink. It's Petcoa. Have you ever heard of Petcoa? No. Now it's interesting. Okay, it's a brand new All-America winner. But, okay, we've heard of Petunia, and we've probably heard of Celebrico, which is Mission Bells. Okay, well, the plant breeder crossed those two, Petunia with Celebricoa, and called it Petcoa, and then developed these different things. So it's Million Bells kind of trails over. Okay. And of course, petunias, well, we know what kind of the way petunias do. And so this cross between the two is really, really attractive. And so anyway, this was my first year with this new thing called Enviva Pink Petcoa.
Okay.
And so anyway, I should look for those in the garden centers in coming, kind of a new hybrid that didn't exist more than a few years ago.
But so it's a good trailer?
Yes, excellent. Okay. Boy, beautiful in containers. And so anyway, I'm enjoying the annual flowers. They're really doing well. And the vegetable gardens have come along, little late to start, but they've been coming along nice. So it's fun to be enjoying the produce. And right now, the perennials are kind of at a little bit of the daylilies are almost done. So there's a little bit of a lull, but I've got some garden phlox. The tall garden phlox are blooming. So it's just fun to see the changes of everything.
Yeah, if you've got sedum in your yard, sedums are really kind of coming into their own now, too.
Yeah, they've got nice blossoms to be. Yep. Ours haven't opened yet, but boy, loaded with blossoms. How about in your yard? Yeah,
sedum, we got some sedum that are really fun looking now. Some of the bushes that will start turning in the fall, they haven't started turning yet, but I'm looking at it. Well, actually,
they're thinking about it.
We planted a berry white hydrangea last year, and nice. That was, as opposed to our other hydrangea, this one is kind of flower, blooms a little late, and it goes from a white almost immediately into a pink, kind of a berry pink, and so that's a real stunner for us.
Isn't that fascinating? Those paniculata type of hydrangeas with kind of the pyramidal cone-shaped flowers. It's fascinating the change in colors that they do. Like you mentioned, John, many of them start out white and then develop pink tinges, so they change with the season. It's interesting. This year we did have some heat, but not months and months of heat, because that heat can adversely affect hydrangeas. They'd like it cool and moist. And I've noticed in some of the last 3 hot drought type years, they sometimes didn't get that color tone that you enjoyed. So enjoying the hydrangeas, the panicle type hydrangeas that are doing so well this year.
And so seeing that out in our yard, makes us keep thinking should we go out and be planting more things? So let's talk about, first of all, what fall planting. what should we know about it? Like we tend to think of planting season as, right after Mother's Day until, the first part of June,
the big spring push.
They get in there and get that in. But there's really kind of the fall planting is kind of, I shouldn't say gaining traction. It's always been there, but it's becoming a little bit more popular, isn't it?
It is. In fact, a number of years ago, the push has been around for a little bit, but much more so than it used to be. The nurseries often came up with a fall is for planting promotion, kind of that trademark, fall is for planting. Well, anyway, in past podcasts, we talked about one of the best inventions in the nursery trade was the plastic nursery pot, because that allowed nursery stock to be potted up and be kept on their sales yard all summer long and right up into fall. When all you had before plastic was invented, things were sold bare root. And of course, they would only last in storage in the spring. And then at some point, then they had to be planted out in fields and et cetera, then dug up the next year for bare root. But anyway, the plastic nursery pot has allowed, in the fall here, we've got good selection of things that we can visit the garden centers with. And there are definite advantages. You might think, well, is it as good to plant now in the fall as it is in the spring? There's some definite advantages. And of course, one of those, a very important one, is planting, a tree, shrub this time of year in the fall will give it a head start. Sometimes you might think, well, should I just wait until next spring? But no, planting now will give that tree or shrub or a perennial a head start. Now, it may not do a lot of top growth yet, this year, but it'll do root growth, because the roots of a tree and shrub will continue growing after planting here until the soil drops to about 40 degrees. Now, in much of the area, soil freezes, solid to where you can't get a shovel in. Maybe the first part of November. It differs by the year. But if planted late August or early September, those tree shrubs have all of September and much of October to root in, and then those roots that it's establishing will help that tree or shrub to be miles ahead next spring versus waiting till next spring to plant. So anyway, you're giving it a head start. And so that is important to, as you can, plant maybe by early September at least, to give that rooting time. And so the roots will continue to grow. And another good reason is sometimes fall is less hectic than spring. In the spring, like we mentioned, there's the big push to get the vegetable garden planted and your annuals and pots and planters.
Graduations or something like
definitely. That. And wedding anniversaries, weddings, and everything else. And so fall is sometimes a little more leisurely time. And sometimes you can look at things now, shrubs, your landscaping, areas where everything is kind of in full leaf, and you can kind of decide too, well, that area is a little bare. Maybe I ought to plant that there. And so you just have a little more time in the fall. And garden centers are usually less busy in the fall. In the spring, it's fun in a garden center when they're busy and crowded. But if you'd like a little personal attention, a Saturday in May isn't the time to get. We can't expect garden centers in May to be able to give you the personal attention. In the fall, if you have a few extra questions about what might go best here, the garden center staff is more likely to have a little bit of extra time to spend with you. Another important thing is watering is easier in the fall of the year. Generally the temperatures start getting cooler. There's less evaporation. The days are a little shorter. So watering is easier. For example, spring planting, which works beautifully, but the spring planted material is being planted right on the threshold of the hot summer.
Yeah.
And so planting in the fall, when things are generally cooler, things establish well, they'll root down in. There's less chance of maybe transplant shock because they aren't going to have to face a hot summer.
Well, and generally, I think in the fall, we could ask John Wheeler this, but I think in the fall too, we tend to get we can count on more precipitation.
Definitely.
And
those fall rains,
and if it's the rain versus even snow, but if it comes before the hard freeze.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you get these nice fall rains, and that is just ideal conditions for a plant to start establishing. So the fall weather-wise is just really great. And sometimes the garden centers will have some fall promotions. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they'll have a few things on sales, and sometimes they'll feature certain things, such as maybe they'll have peonies. Maybe they brought in a whole load of peonies that they'll feature, or other types of shrubs. And sometimes you might get some bargains in the fall of the year. Garden centers might put something on sale if they're kind of long on something. But now, don't count on nurseries having a sale or putting everything on sale, because many garden centers can, especially the locally owned ones, can winter much of their stock.
They've got greenhouses.
Yeah, they've got places where they can winter it, and much of the nursery stock can be laid down, covered with protective blankets or straw, and it'll come back, the following, so they can sell it. So some garden centers don't always put everything on sale, but a tree or a shrub purchased in the fall can be a very good bargain. And not just if they reduce the price. And here's why. Okay, for example, let's take a dogwood. The dogwood that you bought in the spring, okay, is fine. But that dogwood that has maybe been well cared for at the garden center all summer long has put out more growth, the roots have developed, so that same potted dogwood might have a taller height and be more established. And so it's actually, for the same price that you pay in the spring, you're getting more
of an established
for that same dollar. So even when things aren't on sale, you're getting kind of like a plant upgrade.
Yeah.
And for the same amount of money. And don't be overly concerned about the looks. Like, okay, I mentioned a dogwood. Okay, in the fall of the year, some plants are starting to slow down a little. Might have a yellow leaf here, a yellow leaf there. Don't worry if some of them aren't picture perfect.
Right.
Don't worry if they've got maybe a couple of spots on the leaves or something. Mother Nature, just leaves aren't always picture perfect. And so, like I say, if it looks like it's maybe kind of knowing that fall is coming, don't be overly concerned. That's fine. They're going to grow fine. And let's see, the other thing that
getting into talking about fall planting, because we were talking about that you want to plant, you should plan on planting earlier in September than, later around November. But because there's the potential for a freeze, for the ground to freeze, it will happen eventually. Is there more of an importance to covering your area with mulch around just giving it kind of a nice bedding around the top there to kind of give it that warmth that it'll maybe be a little bit gradual? Yeah, the shock won't come in.
Very important. And when we get into some of the tips for successful fall planting, that is one of the things we're going to mention. Now, the little bit of pause that I took there, that I was trying to get my thoughts together, is I was thinking about guarantees. Okay, in the fall of the year, should we be asking the garden centers for a guarantee? Okay, if we plant this in the fall, is it guaranteed? Well, as I've mentioned this before, I'm surprisingly not a fan of garden centers giving a plant guarantee. Okay, if they decide to do that, fine. But if they don't, I'm fine with that. And the reason for that is we can't guarantee life. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be alive in 12 months. And I think to ask a garden center to guarantee that a live plant is going to be alive in 12 months, I think just isn't the way life works. And so anyway, I personally would not insist that a garden center guarantees a certain plant that I buy either in the spring or fall. So if the fall material, if they say, well, these aren't guaranteed, that doesn't bother me. It doesn't mean they're going to die. It just means, we need our local garden centers, we need them to make money. We need them to be profitable. And, they don't know what the coming winter is going to be. Sometimes well-established plants can have a little dieback.
Yeah.
And so we can't expect the garden centers to be weather forecasters. But generally, I don't think I've ever experienced a time when fall planting has not been successful. And so it's got such a good track record. In fact, almost all research universities promote fall planting because it just works. So I guess, even if a garden center says, well, we don't guarantee fall planting, that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just has such a wonderful track record of success.
And we should do a show here probably in the next couple of weeks or the next month or so about how to prepare your garden for winter. I think we've done that before. And that would be a good thing to, again, can't guarantee, but to give you a leg up, to give you all the help that you need in making sure that your garden does well throughout the winter. Let's take a quick little break and we come back more with some fall planting.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Okay, so we're back. We're back. We're talking about fall planting. We talked about a lot of the benefits to fall planting, but let's talk about some of the plants that you can be planting in the fall. What are some of the things that if you want to go out and you want to look for something, what are some of the things that maybe benefit from or that you will see a benefit from next year by fall planting?
And of course, really any trees, shrubs, evergreens, all are just so successfully planted in the fall.
Because you definitely don't want to plant those in the hot day middle of summer.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if we've taken a little vacation from planting in the heat of the summer, now is the time to go at it again. And so really, all trees, shrubs, perennials, potted perennials, those will do well. For perennial flowers in a minute, we'll talk about kind of how to make sure that those, because perennials can be always a little iffy for wintering, so we can give some guidelines on how to have greater success with perennials. And of course, the fall is, speaking of perennials, the fall is the traditional time to do some planting of perennials. Peonies, iris, and of course, the fall bulbs, the tulips, and all those. The garden centers have those. I'm seeing those on their shelves now. And so, for the fall bulbs, this is their main planting time in late summer and early fall. So, really, I think almost anything that you find at the garden centers could successfully be planted now in the fall.
I think when I tend to think of, when we first started talking about the idea of fall planting, one of the first things that came to mind are the things that are really showy in the fall, like mums. Is now a good time to be planting the mums?
No.
Okay. Why is that?
It's interesting. Okay, and moms, the garden centers and the grocery stores and the chain stores all have these beautiful big potted mums. And they're so beautiful to enjoy, kind of as a container plant. But if a person wants to perennialize a mum, it needs the entire growing season in order to establish enough to bloom well in the fall and to live through to the next winter. Now, when I said almost anything can be planted in the fall, well, you found the exception, John. Mums are not a very winter hardy perennial. They're well worth growing, but if you, for best success, they should be purchased from a local owned garden center in the spring. There are definite varieties that are more winter hardy. University of Minnesota has done a lot of trialing and introduced some specific varieties, such as the Min series: Min Yellow, Min Autumn, Min Red, Min White, and also the Mammoth series of mums. They have introduced those, but for best success, to get them to come back each year, they should be planted in the spring so that they have the entire season and they'll bloom that first fall beautifully. And then if we give them a little winter protection, they'll come back. So mums are probably an item of any of the perennials. They're probably one of the least winter hardy, least reliable, I suppose, but still worth planting.
And you've kind of talked about a good rule of thumb is to plant opposite the time that the plant will be at its peak, that it'll be flowering, that it'll be in bloom. So something like a fall planter. That's why you want to plant in the spring, right?
Yeah, exactly. We mentioned planting peonies and iris. Peonies and iris bloom in kind of late spring and early summer. So we choose the season opposite that, which is why we do in the fall. And think about tulips.
The bulbs.
Tulips, yep. Yeah. Tulips, of course, they're spring blooming. So we plant those in the fall of the year. So, yeah, you're exactly right, John, in that mums, which bloom in the fall, typically that's not when you would really be planting them and expect them to do much at that time. So better spring.
What about some things, if you do and this is maybe something to keep in mind, that if you really want something to make a pop in spring, if you really want to get your spring off to a colorful start, maybe something like forsythia or lilac, if you've got the space.
Yeah, definitely. Forsythia, lilac, wonderful blooming shrubs. And, I was just thinking about, we mentioned tulips. It's interesting. Okay, each spring when the tulips are blooming, or I see somebody else that has just beautiful daffodils, hyacinths.
Yes.
I think, gosh, wouldn't that be nice? And so now I've already bought some tulip bulbs, some more tulip bulbs, because I don't want next spring to wish I would have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to increase our tulip planting so that next spring I've got them. And so, sometimes we think about those things when they're actually blooming. So anyway, now's the time to be thinking about those. And so a few pointers maybe about successful planting in the fall.
Yeah.
So maybe we could talk first about trees and shrubs.
Yeah.
And so with trees and shrubs, of course, it's important to dig a large enough hole when you do plant. And so depending on what the pot size is, we don't want to just dig a hole enough just to squeeze that root ball in. We should widen it out. Kind of as a rule of thumb, you should really be digging a hole 2 to 3 times as wide as what that root ball currently is. And the reason for that is there's been research shown that if a plant is just planted into the size hole in which the root ball is planted, the soil around kind of is more compacted, and hard, and the roots don't grow outward as well. Instead, if you dig a hole 2 to 3 times the width of that root ball, you're digging it, you're loosening that soil a bit, and so the new roots can expand outward much more readily. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
It's like stretching.
Yeah, exactly. So if you dig a wide enough hole, much beyond what the current root system is, just that act of digging the hole and then filling back in, it's going to somewhat have loosened that soil so it isn't quite as compacted and firm, so the new roots will be able to expand outward. So it might look kind of funny to be digging a hole 3 times wider than what you need, but there's a reason for that. So anyway, dig 2 to 3 times what that current potted root ball is, and then for shrubs, plant them just slightly deeper than what they are in the pot. So the finished product should have the potted soil, the potted root ball kind of just below soil surface.
Okay.
Trees, just the opposite. Trees are very sensitive to a too deep planting. And sometimes the problem doesn't show up for maybe 10 or 15 years from a deep planting. And the problem with a deep planting is that the trunk can start to rot, and also roots can tend to circle. Okay, so let's devote a minute or so here to tree planting. Okay, so when you take it out of the pot, chances are it's going to have a lot of circling roots that circled around the root ball. If planted just like that, those roots will continue to circle around, and as the roots get bigger, the trunk gets bigger, those roots can squish the tree just like a boa constrictor. And again, 10, 15 years down the road, everything might be fine, and then all of a sudden that tree starts to decline when those circling roots have girdled and choked the stem off. So very important to take the tree out of its pot, and when you see all those circling roots, which usually it will have, gently tease those outward. It's fine to break apart the soil ball. Tease those roots outward. If you can't tease them out of the circular fashion, then use a sharp knife and cut them. And make sure on the bottom also that there aren't a bunch of roots going in a circle. Pull those apart or cut them. And then also the depth of planting is very important. So look at the base of the tree trunk. There should be a natural flare or a widened out part. And the finished planting product, you should be able to see that widened flare above your soil line. And and also check for kind of the top uppermost root. I'm kind of, it may seem like I'm dwelling on this a lot, but we're seeing a lot of 10 to 15 year trees dying because of improper too deep planting. So look for the uppermost main root that's coming off the trunk. And that should only be about an inch below soil surface. Sometimes trees are planted too deeply in the pot, in the container. So we can't assume that the tree was at the proper depth in the pot. So if you just take the tree out of the pot, put it down in a hole, cover it over, you might be planting that tree too deeply. Now, garden centers are becoming more aware of this problem. And so there's a better push to plant things at the proper depth in the nursery pot. And so anyway, very, very important because it's a shame 15 years down the road, a fairly well-established tree, topple over, you do a post-mortem on it and find that it was planted too deep and there's big circling roots choking off the tree.
Speaking of toppling over, a lot of times they will, not all the times, but a lot of times we will put posts on either side to kind of
stabilize, right?
But that would be harder to do as we get into winter, right? It would be hard to break the soil. So maybe you should do that now.
Sure.
Just as a
do
precaution.
That at planting time.
Yeah, at planting time.
And then those stakes can be left on for next growing season. Usually just one growing season, one full growing season would be enough. At that point, the roots would be established out enough to support the tree. So the planting hole is very, very important, the depth. What about mixing in some good peat moss compost? What about amending?
Nice organic, yeah.
What about amending the hole? And for trees, no.
That seems kind of counterintuitive.
That does.
Wouldn't you want to give it its best diet?
Absolutely. And that used to be the recommendation, amend the hole, put all this good stuff in. And what they found was, researchers found, that the roots loved that. They loved it so much that they stayed right in that planting hole. They didn't want to go out into that unamended native soil. And so the current best recommendation is to just don't amend the soil at all, because those tree roots very soon have to go out into that native soil. So just replace when you're backfilling what you dug out and planted. Just use the soil that you dug out. And if you absolutely have to amend that soil, if you just you can't help yourself, then at least blend the amendment, the peat moss or something, blend it well in to the soil, and that you're going to backfill it. So don't have a sharp contrast between the amended soil and the native soil. Kind of give it a gradual transition, if that makes sense, outward.
Speaking of that, because we just were talking about the importance of tree depth is really important. When you're backfilling, and let's say you backfill and you paid attention to the tree depth and you get it to a nice kind of level area, that soil will settle over time. Should you be adding more soil than within a month or so?
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, you see, if you the idea is to dig the planting hole wider than what you need, but only dig it as deep as you need. Okay, so don't dig any deeper, because if you're loosening up the soil underneath where the root ball is going to go, that loosened soil is going to settle, like you mentioned, and then that tree is going to move downward and probably be too deep.
Okay.
And then if it's sunk down in too great, and then you go and add soil on top, you've essentially planted it too deeply.
Okay.
So that's a wonderful point of clarification, John. So dig the hole wider, so that you're kind of loosening the soil so that the roots are going to grow outward, but don't loosen it below what you need to do, because then that soil that you leave undisturbed below is not going to settle. And so then you won't have the case. And of course, the finished product can have a little bit of a depression around the tree basin to hold water. That's always a good idea. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about, will you have to add soil as it settles? So, it's interesting. A lot of these recommendations are based on problems that have been observed. And so we used to not concentrate on not disturbing the soil underneath. But because soil was disturbed underneath, the tree settles, and all of a sudden problems with it going too deeply.
And that if you're concerned about the ground settling around the base of the tree, if you do something like have mulch around it, for that first little bit to kind of help it with its moisture levels, that will decompose and that will add to kind of the soil there around the tree.
Right, exactly. And of course, watering in the fall of the year. We mentioned how the watering, evaporation, everything becomes less, but whether it's a tree, shrub, perennial, anything that you're planting in the fall of the year, even tulip bulbs, immediately after planting should be watered thoroughly. And when I say watered thoroughly, enough so that the water has thoroughly gone down and soaked the area that you disturbed. Okay, so on a tree, you want to put enough water on so that it goes all the way down beyond the area that you disturbed for planting. Tulip bulbs, you'd want to make sure you water thoroughly so it's down beyond the depth of where you planted those bulbs. And shrubbery, the same thing. Now, with shrubbery, I mentioned on tree roots or tree planting, not to amend the soil. Shrubbery is not quite so sensitive to some of those things. Shrubs, the shrub roots tend to stay a little closer around the vicinity of where you planted it. They don't go quite so far out. So shrubs, you can amend the soil on that. You see, tree roots go out at least as far as the tree is tall. If a tree is 30 feet tall, those tree roots are 30 to 60 feet outward. Shrubs, the roots of a shrub tend to stay closer to where the shrub is. So that means if we do some amending of the soil, those shrub roots are going to stay in that amended soil. For many shrubs, it's fine, just in whatever the soil is in your area. But certain shrubs love to have that soil amended. So you see the difference between a tree where the roots are going to go way out, you can't amend all the soil. A shrub, you can amend, and the tree and the roots are going to stay kind of in that. Okay, I'm getting at a couple of shrub types that love to have their soil amended. One is hydrangea.
Okay.
Hydrangeas love to be in something other than a heavy clay or a dry sand. They love to have organic type soils. So adding peat moss, compost, whether it's a heavy clay soil or a light sandy soil, hydrangeas just love that organic type stuff put in. So when you're planting, add plenty of that down around, mix it on in, backfill it with a nicely amended soil. The hydrangeas are going to love it. Same with roses. Roses just love amended soil. It makes them grow so much better. Plenty of peat moss.
These shrubs, these bushes that we're expecting a lot of color on. Maybe there's that kind of a good exactly. kind of rule of thumb. Good if you blossoms, want color, you want to give it a little extra something in the soil.
A well-amended soil. So trees, don't amend the soil. Shrubs, especially types like roses, hydrangeas, things that produce the beautiful colorful flowers, yes, definitely amend the
Peonies?
soil. Yeah, peonies. Let's talk about perennials for amending. Yes, almost all perennials would love to have a nice organic type soil. Peonies are so tried and true. The homesteaders planted those in pioneer days, and they didn't probably have peat moss available. And so peonies, they'll grow on almost anything. Iris do good even without. But for most perennials, you can't go wrong with amending the soil. They just by nature love that organic type material. And the roots don't grow out so far, so they tend to stay in that amended soil so they can take advantage. It's not like you're amending this little area here and then the roots are going to go far and wide and have to be out in the native soil like a tree would. So I love to have bales of peat moss on hand or compost and add plenty of that. Mix it in really, really well on any of the perennials that we're planting. And, of course, also important with perennials that we plant, make sure you water it in like we mentioned for the other things. And mulching. Now, tree, you mentioned around a tree also to mulch. A layer of wood chips works really, really well. If the layer is thick enough, and by thick enough, we mean about 5 inches, then weeds and grass usually will not grow through that. But I like to, around a tree, before I put the mulch on, I like to have an underlayment of something. I use cardboard.
Okay.
The cardboard will smother out any weeds or grass. You don't have to even remove the grass, just cardboard, and then put about a 5-inch layer of shredded wood material over that cardboard. The cardboard is going to disintegrate over time, but in the meantime, it's had some teeth that will block out and destroy the grass or any weeds underneath, and it'll just decompose. If a person puts a weed fabric, the weed block fabric around a tree, that works very well too. We do have to be careful as the tree expands in trunk size, that weed fabric doesn't always expand. So if you have put weed fabric around trees, take a look every so often, at least once a year, to make sure that that isn't becoming embedded in the tree trunk as the tree trunk expands. And mulching around shrubs. Shrubs love to have a mulch around. Perennials as well. So big fan of shredded wood material. Now there's kind of a difference between wood chips. A person can buy bags of wood chips versus shredded wood material.
Yeah, now there's triple shredded too. I see on
exactly.
some things.
Let's run through the big shredder, I guess, 3 times. And wood chips themselves don't kind of nest together. They can kind of tend to float or blow a little more. These shredded materials have shreds, and the material just tends to nest together and form kind of a nicer barrier than the actual wood chips, which are more kind of just a hard piece of wood. And so I like the shredded material. And, well, let's see. What about fertilizing trees, shrubs, perennials in the fall? And really, there's no reason to fertilize in the fall. The roots are growing, but there's enough natural fertility in. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to stimulate a lot of fresh top growth on these, even though the roots are growing. If top growth were stimulated with fertilizer in the fall, that top growth would tend to be lush and soft and more apt to winter injury, prone to winter injury. So fertilizing in the fall, no. Lawns, yes, but that's for another day.
Yeah.
But anyway, trees, shrubs, perennials generally not fertilized in the fall of the year. Now, you mentioned, I believe, some winter protection on different things. Winter protection of fall planted material is especially important on perennials. Perennials are always a little bit susceptible to what happens in the winter. Perennials, if we don't have snow, the soil can freeze and thaw. And so winter protection is always an issue with perennials, not just things planted in the fall. But anyway, fall planted perennials, to make sure they have enough protection. You see, we don't know what the snow is going to do.
Yeah.
If we got good, generous snow, it's kind of a hassle for snow blowing, but the perennials love that deep snow. But we don't know if we're going to get that. So fall planted perennials, or any that maybe are recently planted, do benefit from a covering of some sort. And by covering, a fall mulch applied really late October or so is fine, early November. Maybe it's leaves mounded up over, or you can pull some of the shredded bark up and around. That gives some protection. Then the spring, pull it back down, or straw will work too. And so that just gives the perennials a little bit of an edge. Shrubbery that's planted in the fall doesn't need any extra. Trees, neither. Doesn't need any special. Fruit trees should be wrapped, though, in the fall of the year, at least by early November, because when winter sets in and there's not much greenery, then the rabbits and deer start looking for things to eat, and The young little apple trees are very tempting. And also they're susceptible to winter sun scald on the trunks, which is a major killer of fruit trees. And so wrapping the trees in the fall of the year, late October or so, really works well. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot of special measures that need to be taken with anything planted in the fall. And it just has such a successful track record. And I just find it so fascinating to be planting in the fall because it's an investment to next year. Mm-hmm. You're kind of getting a jump on it. I know next spring's going to be busy, so I just have such a good time planting in the fall. You start getting kind of that fallish feel to the air a little bit, even in late August, early September. The days are a little shorter, and it gives me hope. I'm investing in hope when I plant in the fall because I'm already working for next year.
That's a good way to think about it. Well, let's take another quick little break, and we come back more with fall planting.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're talking about fall planting this week, and we can't get out of here without asking you, how late can we plant?
Okay, the earlier the better, late August and early September, because that will give all of September and a good chunk of October for those materials, trees, shrubs, perennials, to form roots in. If you planted too late, it just doesn't have as much time to root in before the soil freezes solid, which for much of the area is the first part of November, as we had mentioned. So I'd kind of say if you are able, kind of the first week in September is kind of to set that as maybe have your fall planting done by then would be really, really well. Are you going to do some fall planting? Anything in your plans?
We're going to be kind of taking up an area of lawn, and then with the idea that we'll be doing that mostly for next year. But we may want to get some bigger things in now just to get them in and, like you said, get them maybe a little bit established so that when spring comes around, they can really kind of take off. So we may do some small things. We don't have any big projects. How about you?
Well, have you ever planted something that you regretted planting? I did.
Yeah.
I planted about, let's see, would it be 6 years ago? I planted in front of our house in the foundation planting. I planted a Diervilla. Diervilla is also called bush honeysuckle. It's not like the Tatarian honeysuckle that gets little orange or red berries. It's bush honeysuckle Diervilla. It gets a nice coppery fall color. It grows about 2 to 3 feet high.
Okay.
The problem is I didn't realize how much it spread.
Oh.
It sends underground runners, and this shrub is invading everything around it. I've got nice spreading junipers on either side, and this thing is sending up sprouts everywhere and from these underground runners. I did not realize, the old saying, to grow it is to know it. Okay, I had never grown Diervilla, so I thought, this would be fun to try. And it was sprouting up everywhere. So a couple of nights ago, from one plant, it had spread into an area probably 5 feet wide, and it didn't just become that, the top didn't just spread 5 feet. All these runners were running out and popping up 5 feet from where the original plant was and just making a huge mess. So the other night I dug out this whole thing. I imagine I'm going to expect sprouts to be coming up that I'm going to have to kind of deal with.
Yep.
And so anyway, I dug that all out. So now I'm going to put a replacement shrub in that. I'm maybe thinking of one of the hydrangea types.
Okay.
The paniculata hydrangea types. And so anyway, that's on my to-do list of what I want to plant. And I'm going to visit the garden centers. I want to get a lot more different types of perennials planted this time. And I don't have a delphinium.
Okay.
And I want, the tall spires of delphinium because they're such a good contrast.
Yes.
And so I've got those. So I got lots of things on my wish list.
Well, that'll be great. A great time to get out and still be active in the yard.
It is. Man, the fall is so awesome.
Well, and so if people have questions about fall planting or anything in their garden, or if they just want to send you pictures, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, at ndsu.edu. And thank you for all of those who do write in. And it's fun, either a question or just mention what you've got growing. We're all in this together. And so it's fun to see the successes of people. And it's awesome to hear from everyone.
Well, this has been great, Don. We're looking forward to talking to you next week.
And I can't wait to get out and actually do some fall planting.
That'll be great.
Have a good week, everyone.